Hello and welcome back to another lecture. Amazon recently introduced a new feature called Amazon EC2 Connect Endpoint. One of the main things I like about this feature is that it allows you to use the AWS CLI command to securely connect to any EC2 instance in the public and private subnet in your VPC. It also allows you to connect to other resources in your VPC as well. To use this feature, we have to create an EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint in any subnet in our VPC. This will allow us to use the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint service in the AWS cloud, which allows us to connect to any EC2 instance or resources in our VPC. I have read this blog post on the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint, and I have used it to generate these notes, which details all the necessary steps we need to use this feature. To start, the first thing we have to do is create a VPC with public and private subnets. I have already created the VPC in my AWS account, and if you don't have a custom VPC in your AWS account with public and private subnets, I will leave a link in this video's description on how to create a custom VPC with public and private subnets. This is the prerequisite. Before you can complete this lecture, make sure you have created a VPC with public and private subnets. This is the reference architecture that I used to create the VPC that I am using for this lecture. Once you have created the VPC in your AWS account, the next thing we need to do is install the latest version of the AWS CLI on our computer. And if you already have the AWS CLI installed on your computer, make sure you update it to the latest version of the AWS CLI. To install the latest version of the AWS CLI on our computer, open a new web browser. In the web browser, I'm going to type AWS CLI download. Once you type AWS CLI download, press enter. And I will also leave the link to the documentation in this video's description. Basically, for every step we are following, I will leave the necessary link in this video's description. Once you type AWS CLI download in Google, you should see the AWS documentation here where it says amazon.com, and the title is Installing or Updating the Latest Version of the AWS CLI. This is what we want, so I'm going to select it. And on this page, you will find the instruction to install the latest version of the AWS CLI on your computer. What you have to do is scroll down, and under AWS CLI Install and Update Instructions, you will find the operating system you want to install the AWS CLI on. Since I am using a Windows computer, I'm going to select the drop-down under Windows. Then I'm going to scroll down here. The easiest way to download the latest version of the AWS CLI on our computer is to use this command. So all you have to do is click this box to copy the command. Once you have copied the command, open the terminal on your computer. Please note that if you are using a Windows computer, the terminal we are using is PowerShell. But if you are using a Mac computer, open the terminal on your Mac computer. So in the search box, type PowerShell. Once you type PowerShell in the search box, you are going to see the PowerShell app here. Select it to open it. Once you have opened PowerShell on your computer, the next thing you are going to do is right-click to paste the command you copied there. Then press enter. Once you press enter, it is going to open the Windows installer. We'll wait for it to load. Once the Windows installer has loaded, next, you will see this setup wizard, which allows you to install the AWS CLI on your computer. All you have to do is click next here. And on this page, we are going to check this box to accept, then click next. And on this page, we will click next. Then click install. This will start to install the AWS CLI on your computer, and we'll give it some time to install it. If you get the option that asks you, do you want to allow this app to make changes on your device, click yes. and it should continue installing the AWS CLI. We'll give it some time to install it. We have successfully installed the AWS CLI on our computer. The next thing I'm going to do is click Finish. And I'm going to close my PowerShell terminal and I'm going to open it again. Once you open your terminal again, we are going to verify that the latest version of the AWS CLI was successfully installed on our computer. And the command to verify that the AWS CLI is installed on your computer is AWS --version. Once you type this command, press enter. When you type the command and press enter, you will get this output. This means that the AWS CLI was successfully installed on your computer. One thing I want to note is that if you already have the AWS CLI installed on your computer, make sure you have updated to the latest version of the AWS CLI. At the time of recording this video, the latest version is version 2.12.3. Once you have installed the latest version of the AWS CLI on your computer, the next thing you must do is create an IAM policy that allows users to create, describe, and delete EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. This is the link to the documentation on the permissions you need to include in the policy. I have included the steps and the link in this video's description. So I'm going to click this link to go to the documentation. Once you are in the documentation, scroll down. And this is the section that allows you to create a policy that allows a user to create, describe, and delete EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. If you scroll down here, you will see a sample of the policy. Before we copy this policy, I want you to note that anything that AWS has highlighted in red, this means that you have to update these values. So when we copy this policy, we must add our region here, and we must also add our account ID. So please keep that in mind. I'm going to copy this policy by clicking this box. Once you have copied the policy, let's go to the Management Console. And in the Management Console, type IAM in the search box. Once you type IAM, select IAM under Services. And in your IAM console, select Policies. Then click Create Policy. On this page, click JSON. And remove this policy here and paste the policy you copied from the documentation here. Once you paste the policy, don't forget that on line 13, we have to update our region here, and we also have to update the value of our account ID here. So first, let's update our region. To get your region, remember the AWS region are here, and for this lecture, I'm going to use US East 1. I'm going to select it here, right click to copy it, and here where it has region, make sure you highlight the region part. Be very careful when you highlight the region part, make sure you only highlight region, then right click and click paste. Once you have replaced the region, there is a colon here and a colon here. Next, we want to replace our account ID. So I'm going to select the account ID, and to get your account ID, in the upper right hand corner, select this drop down. You'll see your account ID here. Click this box to copy it, and we are going to replace it here by right clicking and pasting it there. That is all we need to do here. Then scroll down and click Next. On this page, scroll up and give your policy a name. For this policy name, I'm going to call it Create EIC Endpoints. Once you've given it a name, scroll down and click Create Policy. We have successfully created the policy, and we call the policy create EIC endpoint. If you type create EIC endpoint in this filter box, you should see it. And you can see this is the policy I just created. According to the documentation that I read, we are going to create another policy which allows our users to use the endpoint. The first policy we created allows our user to create, describe, and delete the endpoint. The next policy we will create will allow our users to use the endpoint. So here, I'm going to click this link to go to the documentation. It is the same documentation as the last one, but I will include the link in this video's description. In this documentation, scroll down, and under this section, which says allow users to use EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint to connect to instances. If you scroll down, you will see the sample policy here. Remember that when you copy this policy, here we have to update the value for our region, and here we have to update the value for our account ID. And here, AWS also gives you the option to limit this permission to a specific EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. Since we haven't created our EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint here, we are going to allow this policy to access any EC2 Instance Endpoint we have in our account. So we are going to modify this value when we create the policy. There is also a condition in this policy, and we will remove the condition. So the next thing I want you to do is copy this policy by clicking this box. Once you have copied the policy, let's go to our IAM console. In the IAM console, make sure you are under Policies and click Create Policy. Then on this page, select JSON. Remove this policy and paste the policy you copied in it. Once you paste the policy you copied in it, don't forget to update the value for your region. So here, remember I am using US East 1 for my region. So I'm going to copy the value here and paste it here. Then I'm also going to replace the account ID. To get my account ID, I'm going to click this drop down and click this box to copy my account ID and paste it here. Then for this last part, after the /, where we have the ID of the EC2 Instance Endpoint, we are going to remove that and add a star. The star means that we want this policy to have access to any EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint in our account. And if you look in the documentation, they also mentioned it here. Once you have added the star, under condition on line 8, we are going to remove the condition. Before you remove the condition, I want you to select this curly bracket here that is opening. This tells you that this curly bracket that is open corresponds with this curly bracket here. So what I want you to do is remove everything between those two curly brackets. So from line 17 to line 9, I'm going to select it and press the backspace on my keyboard to remove everything. And I'm going to press the backspace here on this curly bracket to bring it here. So your policy should look like this. I'm also going to leave a sample of this policy in this video's description. Once you have added the permissions for your policy, scroll down and click Next. Then scroll up here and give your policy a name. For the name of the policy, we are going to call the name Use EIC Endpoints. Once you have given the policy a name, scroll down and click Create Policy. These are the two policies we need to create. Once you've created the policy, the next step is we are going to create an IAM user that has access key and secret access key. We are also going to attach the policies we just created to this IAM user. So let's go to the Management Console. And in the IAM Management Console, select Users and click Create Users. Give the user a name. Once you have entered the name for the user, here you have the option to specify whether you want to give this user access to the AWS Management Console. If you want to give this user access to the AWS Management Console, you are going to check this box. For this lecture, I won't give this user access to the AWS Management Console. This user is only going to be interacting with my AWS account using the CLI command. So I'm going to click Next. On this page, this is where you attach permission to this user. This means that what do you want to allow this user to do in your AWS account? For this lecture, we are going to give this user administrator access. Remember that we also have to assign the two policies we created for the EIC to this user. So what we have to do here is click Attach Policies directly. Then scroll down. The first policy we will attach to this user is Administrator Access. Select Administrator Access here. And in this search box, type the name of the policy you created previously. The first policy I created, I called it Create EIC Endpoint. Once you start to type the name of the policy, it should show up here under policy name. Check it. Then I'm going to look for the second policy. The second policy, I called it Use EIC Endpoint. Once you start to type the name of the policy, it will show up here. Check this box, then click Next. On this summary page, if I scroll up here, you can see the name of the user I am creating. This user has no access to the management console, and these are the policies that I have assigned to this user. Once you have reviewed your user details and you have assigned the policies to the user, scroll down and click Create User. I have successfully created the user, and you can see the user name here. To see the user, you can also click View User here, and it will bring you to the user's profile. Once you have selected the user you just created, the next thing we have to do is create an access key ID and secret access key for this user. To create access key for your user, once you have selected the user, you'll see the user name here. Then select Security Credentials tab. On the Security Credentials tab, scroll down. Under Access Keys, click Create Access Key. Then under Use Case, select Command Line Interface. Then scroll down and check this box to acknowledge, then click Next. On this page, you can add a description if you want. It is optional, so I'm not going to add a description. Then the next thing I'm going to do is click Create Access Key. And there you go. We have created an access key and secret access key for the user we just created. Now that we have created an access key and secret access key for the user, for the next step in our note, we have to run the AWS configure command to configure this user's credentials on our computer. To run the AWS configure command to configure this user's credentials on your computer, open the PowerShell terminal again. And if you are on a Mac computer, open your Mac terminal. Once you open the terminal on your computer, the command we will use to configure this user's access key and secret access key on our computer is AWS configure. So in your terminal, type AWS configure. Once you type AWS configure, press enter. When you type AWS configure and press enter, the first thing it is going to ask you for is your user's access key ID. This is our user's access key, so click this box to copy it. Once you copy it, come to your terminal and paste it here. Then press enter. Next, it is going to ask you for your user's secret access key. Go back to the IAM console. Click this box to copy your user's secret access key. Then come back to the terminal, paste it here, and press enter. The next option it is going to ask you is the default region. Remember, I am using US East 1 for my region, so I can select here. I'll select US East 1 and copy it. Once I copy it, I'll go back to my terminal and I'll paste it here. Then press enter. And the final option is the default output format. For that option, just press enter. This is all we have to do to configure the user's access key and secret access key on our computer. Remember that anytime you run the AWS configure command to configure a user's access key and secret access key on your computer, what this command is doing is that it is creating a file on your computer and storing these credentials in that file. Another thing you must know is that the file is always stored in your home directory. So whether you are working on a Windows computer or a Mac computer, the file is always stored in your home directory. So since I'm working on a Windows computer, to see the file, I'm going to open the File Explorer. Once you open the File Explorer, select the C drive. Then in the C drive, select Users. Then once you select Users, here you will probably see your name. On my computer, it is called admin. It is also equivalent to what you are seeing here. So like I said, whether you are working on a Mac computer or a Windows computer, whatever part you are seeing here in your terminal, that is the home directory on your computer. So you want to navigate to that home directory. And on my computer, it says admin. So I'm going to click the admin to go in there. This is the home directory on my computer. Once you have navigated to the home directory on your computer, in your home directory, you are going to see a .aws folder. Double click on that folder. And in that folder, you are going to see two files, config and credentials. If you right click on the config file and select open with, and I'm going to choose Notepad and click OK. In this file, in a bracket, you will see default, and under it, you are going to see region and the region that I configured, which is US East 1. Next, if we close this file, and let's select the credentials file and select open with, select Notepad and click OK. In this file, you also see default in the bracket, and under it, you will see the user's access key ID and secret access key that I configured. So basically what I am saying is, whether you are using a Windows computer or a Mac computer, the act of running the AWS configure command, all the command is doing is, it is creating these files on your computer. And remember that I said that you will find these files in the .aws folder in the home directory on your computer. Now that we have configured our user's access key and secret access key on our computer, the next thing we need to do is verify that the OpenSSH client is installed on our computer. In order to use the AWS CLI command to connect to our EC2 instance, the OpenSSH client must be installed on our computer. And if you are using a Windows computer, the OpenSSH client should already be installed on your computer. I believe it comes by default on your Windows computer. If you are using a Mac computer, I also want you to verify that the OpenSSH client is installed on your computer. To verify that the OpenSSH client is installed on our computer, we are going to run this command. I want you to open the PowerShell terminal again. And the command we will use to verify that the OpenSSH client is installed on our computer is SSH space -V. Once you type the command, press enter. When you type the command and press enter, if you get this output, this means that the OpenSSH client is installed on your computer. The next thing we have to do is create two security groups in our VPC. The first security group we are going to create is the security group we will attach to the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. And on this security group, we are only going to open the outbound traffic on port 22. And we will limit the source of that traffic to our VPC CIDR. On the second security group, this is the security group we will attach to the EC2 instances we want to connect to using the endpoint. And on this security group, we are going to open port 22 on the inbound, and we will limit the source to the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint security group we created here. If you are wondering where I got this information from, I got this information from the AWS documentation, and I will include the reference link in this video's description. Let's go to the management console to create our security groups. In the management console, type VPC in the search box and select VPC under services. In the VPC console, first I'm going to filter by the VPC that I want to create the security group in. The VPC that I created for this lecture is the VPC I called Dev VPC. So look for the VPC that you created that has public and private subnet. Select the VPC under Filter by VPC. Once you have selected the VPC, scroll down here. Under Security, select Security Groups. Then click Create Security Group. We are going to give the security group a name. For the first security group, we are going to call it EIC Endpoint SG. So I'm going to copy the name I created for that security group here, and I'm going to paste it here. For the description, I'm going to paste the name. And for the VPC, click this X to remove this VPC, and under the drop-down, make sure you select the right VPC. The VPC that I am using for this lecture is the Dev VPC. Then scroll down. For inbound rules, we are not going to add any rules. And on the outbound rules, we are going to select this drop-down and look for SSH. Once you select SSH, SSH is on port 22. And for the destination, click this X to remove this CIDR. And in here, you want to enter the CIDR block for the VPC that you are creating this security group in. To get the CIDR block for this VPC, I'm going to open the management console in a new tab. Then I'll go to that tab. Then type VPC in here to go to your VPC console. Select VPC under Services. Then once again, under Filter by VPC, select this drop down and select the VPC you are creating the security group in. Then select your VPCs. You should see the VPC you are creating the security group in here, and this is the CIDR block for the VPC. So I'm going to select this CIDR block and press Ctrl+C to copy it. Once you copy the CIDR block, come back to the previous tab, and under Destination here, we are going to paste that CIDR block in there. Once you paste it, select it here, and that's all you need to do. Remember that for the security group we are creating for the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint, we only want to open the outbound rule, and the outbound rule will be SSH on port 22. And for the destination, we are going to limit the source to the CIDR block of our VPC. Once you have added the outbound rule, scroll down and click Create Security Group. Next, we are going to create the security group that we will assign to the EC2 instance that we want to use the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint to connect to. So here, you are going to select Security Groups again. Then click Create Security Group. Give the security group a name. And I believe the name that I want to call the security group is EC2 Instance SG. So I'll copy this name. And in the management console, enter the name for your security group. Once you enter the name for your security group, use the same name for the description. And under VPC, remove this VPC by clicking the X. Once you get the drop down, select the right VPC that you want to create the security group in. Then scroll down. Under Inbound Rules, we are going to click Add Rule. Then we will select this drop down and select SSH. SSH is on port 22. And for the source, we are going to limit it to the EIC Endpoint SG we created previously. So select in here and scroll down here. Under Security Groups section, you will see the security group we previously created which I called it EIC Endpoint SG. Select it. Then scroll down here. The outbound rule, we will leave it as the same. Scroll down and click Create Security Group. This is all we need to do to create the security group that will allow us to use the AWS CLI command to connect to our EC2 instance using the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. The next thing we have to do is create the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint in our VPC. To create the endpoint in our VPC, go into the Management Console and make sure you are in your VPC console. Remember that I am already in the VPC dashboard. If you are not in your VPC dashboard, type VPC in the search box and select VPC under Services. That will bring you to your VPC dashboard. Once you are in your VPC dashboard, on the left side here, scroll down and select Endpoints. Then click Create Endpoint. Give the endpoint a name. Once you've given the endpoint a name, under Service category, make sure you select EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. Once you've selected, scroll down. Under VPC, select this drop down and select the VPC you want to create the endpoint in. Remember, this is the VPC you created that has public and private subnets. The VPC that I am using for this lecture is the Dev VPC. I'm going to select it. Once you select the VPC, scroll down. The next section is security groups, and this is the security group you want to attach to this endpoint. The security group we want to attach to this endpoint is the EIC Endpoint security group I created. So I'm going to select it by checking this box. Then scroll down. Under subnet, I'm going to select this drop down and I'm going to select my private app subnet AZ1. You can select any subnet in your VPC. It doesn't matter. You only need one subnet. Once you select the subnet in your VPC, scroll down and click Create Endpoint. It is now creating the endpoint, and it will take some time to create the endpoint. Basically, we want to make sure that the status of our endpoint has changed from pending to available. I'm going to pause the video and wait for it to finish creating the endpoint. Then we are going to move on to the next step, which is to launch our EC2 instances. It took about 5 minutes to create the endpoint, and once the endpoint has been successfully created, the status will change to available. Next, we are going to launch an EC2 instance in the private subnet, and we will test whether we can use the CLI command to connect to that EC2 instance using the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. So let's go into the Management Console, and in the search box, type EC2. Select EC2 under Services. Then select Instances Running and click Launch Instances. First, I'm going to give the EC2 instance a name. I'll call it EC2. Then scroll down. Under Application and OS Images, we are going to select Amazon Linux. And for the AMI, you can use any AMI. For this lecture, I'm going to use the Amazon Linux 2023 AMI. You can also use the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. Any one of these AMI will work. Once you have selected your AMI, scroll down. Under Instance Type, leave it on T2 Micro. Under Key Pair, remember that previously to SSH into our EC2 instance, we have to assign a key pair. When we use the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint, AWS will create the temporary keys that will be used to connect to the EC2 instance. So for key pair, we are going to select this drop down and select Proceed without a key pair. Once you select Proceed without a key pair, scroll down. Under Network Settings, we are going to click Edit. And for our VPC, I'm going to select this drop down and select the VPC that I created the endpoint in. It is the dev VPC. I'll select it. Once you select your VPC, under subnet, I'm going to select this drop down. The subnet that I'm going to choose is my private app subnet AZ2. So choose any private subnet in your VPC. Under firewall security groups, we are going to select an existing security group. Then, under this drop down, we will select the EC2 Instance SG security group we created. Then scroll down, and that is all we need to do to create our EC2 instance. You can see the settings here. I'm using the Amazon Linux 2023 AMI. The instance type is T2 Micro. The security group that I have attached to the EC2 instance is the EC2 Instance SG security group I created previously. And on this EC2 instance, we did not add a key pair. Then I'm going to click Launch Instance. We have successfully launched the EC2 instance. I'll select the instance ID to go to the console. We will give it some time for the instance state to change to running. Now that the instance state has changed to running, for the next step, we are going to test whether we can connect to this EC2 instance using the endpoint. The first way we will test whether we can connect to this EC2 instance using the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint is from the management console. Once the instance state of your EC2 instance has changed to running, select it, then click Connect here. On this page, under EC2 Instance Connect, it has populated some information for our EC2 instance. Here, you can see the ID of our EC2 instance, and under Connection Type, make sure you select Connect using EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. Once you select it, scroll down, and under EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint, select in here, and you should see this drop down, which will show you the endpoint we created previously. Select it. Then click Connect. It is going to open a new tab, and there you go. You can see we have connected to our EC2 instance using the EC2 Instance Connect Endpoint. The next way we are going to test whether we can connect to our EC2 instance, which is the major reason why I like this new feature by AWS, is using the AWS CLI command. To use the AWS CLI command to connect to our EC2 instance, we are going to run this CLI command. And the command is AWS EC2 Instance Connect SSH. We will specify the flag instance ID, and here all we have to do is specify the ID of the instance we want to connect to. Before you copy this command, I want you to update this value to your instance ID. I'm going to go back to the management console, and let's go back to our EC2 console here. Select your EC2 instance. Copy the instance ID here by clicking this box. Once you copy the instance ID, come to that command. I'm going to replace everything here, including the signs. So your command should look like this. It is AWS EC2 Instance Connect SSH, the flag instance ID, and the instance ID of the EC2 instance that you want to use this AWS CLI command to connect to. Once you have created your command, copy it. And I want you to open the terminal. On a Windows computer, I am using PowerShell. In your PowerShell terminal or on your Mac computer, once you have opened your Mac terminal, paste the CLI command here and press enter. Give it some time to load. The first time you try to connect to an EC2 instance, it will ask you this question, type yes, and press enter. And there you go. We have successfully connected to an EC2 instance in the private subnet using the AWS CLI command. So moving forward, if you choose to use the AWS CLI command, you don't have to use Bastion host anymore or create key pairs for your EC2 instance. This is the major thing that I like about this feature. Once you set everything up, it is now easier to connect to your EC2 instance in the private subnet. The only thing I'm not sure about is the pricing for the endpoint. So please help me out in the comment section if you know about the pricing for the endpoint. Do we get charged for leaving it running, or do we get charged for every time we use the CLI command to access our EC2 instance? That is the only thing I'm not sure about. But this is definitely better than using the bastion host to access our EC2 instance, and it limits the amount of work we have to do with managing our key pairs. This is all I want to show you in this lecture, that now you can use the AWS CLI command to SSH into your EC2 instance in the public and private subnets in your VPC. To clean up for this lecture, all we have to do is terminate our EC2 instance. So go back to your EC2 console, select your EC2 instance, click Instance State and click Terminate Instance. Then click Terminate. Once you terminate your EC2 instance, the next thing we have to do is delete the endpoint, because like I said, at this point, I couldn't find any documentation for the pricing of the endpoint. And as you guys saw, it is very easy to create the endpoint. So for now, I am going to delete the endpoint. To delete the endpoint, type VPC in the search box and select VPC under Services. Then on your VPC dashboard, click Endpoints. You should see the endpoint for your EC2 Instance Connect. Select it, click Actions, and click Delete VPC Endpoint, and type Delete. Once you type Delete, click Delete. Once you delete it, click Refresh here to make sure you have successfully deleted the endpoint. This is all I want to show you in this lecture. If you have any questions or there's any part of these steps you don't understand, please leave your comments below. Also, if you know the pricing for the endpoint, please leave the link in this video's description. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.